China is actually quite frustrated. What is clear is that they're much better prepared during the second Trump administration, during the first Trump administration, and that they have a much more diverse and deeper toolkit. But what's been unexpected for them is just how US China trade relations have literally unraveled so quickly without a clear off ramp of a solution or even a communication channel of how to deal with this issue, except unless China capitulates, which is not likely going to happen given the China social media pressure for the Chinese leadership to stand strong.
Yeah, and that certainly is what it appears is happening now. In a simplified way, it feels like there's a lot of brinkmanship here. The two presidents are waiting to see who will blink first. I just want to pick up on the point you made about China seems better prepared this time. Why do you think that is? Were they anticipating this?
China actually was anticipating this. They made it fairly clear in their messaging even last year that they would basically follow the following steps. They would react firmly, although proportionately. They would have a utilization of more tools such as investigations, counter tariffs, export bans, and so forth. And interestingly, they do believe they have a better capacity to endure pain than the US can, although that thesis will be tested in the coming months.
Yeah, my word. And it's about, 7:36 in the morning in Beijing and across that part of Asia at the moment. What are you expecting the impact to be when markets start to open across the region in the next couple of hours?
Well, certainly, other than the Chinese markets, many of the markets should breathe a sigh of relief. And so the rapid declines we've seen in the last several weeks should see a fair amount of recovery following what the US markets did. China could be an exception, but here's a critical point. China's government now looks at the Chinese stock market as really a proxy for public confidence in government policy. So the government has made very clear the Chinese stock market almost has a put. In fact, it won't be allowed to decline too much.
So will the Chinese government in that sense then be putting safeguards or measures to insulate the market? And I guess, is that akin to what we have seen reported in the last couple of days of some say it's weakening, others say it's managing the value of the yuan?
Absolutely. In fact, one of the key points China's acknowledged is that if they can't export their way to GDP growth, then they're going to have to focus a lot more on the domestic economy, particularly consumption. And certainly one of the ways to improve consumption growth is if they can let the stock market go up. So through the wealth effect, everyone hopefully feels better to purchase more.
So if that's the case and the Chinese government has those extraordinary levers to be able to manage the market and the currency, is there a point at which they say, actually, this has gone too far, or is that just not part of the decision-making process there?
So the Chinese government is very methodical. They think through these very carefully. So they've been paying attention to the strength of the renminbi, the impact on trade, and so forth. But certainly there's a lot more social media pressure where you're hearing the netizens protest at the unfairness, the unilateralism of the US, the bullyism. And so the challenge is this, is that if this rhetoric becomes too strong, is it going to essentially corner Xi Jinping's options to look for negotiation?
I'm really curious about that point about the options, because I'm not sure if you've seen this opinion piece that's been written in the Sydney Morning Herald here in Australia overnight from China's ambassador to Australia. But he's really in this saying that there needs to be measures to come together to walk hand in hand with China. This is particularly aimed at the Australian government. Of course, we're in the middle of an election here, but also the international community, pointing out that there needs to be a challenge to the, quote, protectionism. What do you make of this? Is that one of the options you're referring to?
Absolutely. So what China has thought about as a recent strategy is how can China drive a wedge between the US and the rest of the world? So we're starting to see, for example, a planned trip by President Xi Jinping to Vietnam, to the ASEAN summit in Malaysia, and so forth. But the challenge is Trump's sudden pause of tariffs across all these other trading nations kind of cut short China's immediate strategy of trying to take advantage and utilize goodwill. with the rest of the world.
And just finally, we've seen this 90-day pause from US President Donald Trump on all of the additional tariffs for the rest of the world outside of the 10% base, and of course some of the tariffs focused on steel and aluminium and the like. But does this situation between China and the United States pose a risk to other economies such as Australia or elsewhere simply because of the flow-on impacts that might flow from it?
Absolutely. For many situations, there was a belief that for if you were a manufacturer, for example, that you could produce in China because there were huge production efficiencies, a high-end manufacturing ecosystem. And so there was a strategy of maybe having using China as a manufacturing base to export to the rest of the world. If that was the case, this current high tariff situation on China doesn't make that possible. But it also presents a challenge for many nations of whose side will you follow? Will you side the US or will you side with China? And that's an awkward situation for any trading nation to have to wrestle with.
Yeah, that is going to be an interesting one to watch. Han Chanlin, China Country Director of the Asia Group from Shanghai. Many thanks for your time.
Thank you.